nutrition. A balanced meal with variation. Around on 2 of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyles. A daily dose of nutrition. A balanced meal with variation. Around on 2 of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyle. Live longer, happier, better with FNR.
Ang awiting ito'y gabay sa Pilipino. Para sa gustong nutrisyon, kalusugan natin dapat number 1. 10 tips lamang ang inyong tandaan. Number 1, kumain ng iba't ibang pagkain. 2, kay baby sa unang 6 months breastfeeding at mula 6 months angkop na pagkain. 3, araw-araw maggulay at prutas. 4, isda o karne at pagkain mayaman sa protina. 5, uminom ng gatas at kumain ng calcium-rich foods. 6, tubig at pagkain tiyaking malinis at ligtas. 7, gumamit ng iodized salt. 8, hinay lang sa maalat, mamantika, matamis. 9, i-maintain ang tamang timbang. 10, maging aktibo, araw-araw ehersisyo. Huwag manigarilyo, alak iwasan mo. Ito ang bagong gabay sa wastong nutrisyon. Ito ang bagong gabay sa wastong nutrisyon. Ito ang bagong gabay sa wastong nutrisyon.
Para sa Pilipino.
Bingang Pinoy. Bingang Pinoy.
Alam mo na ba na may bagong gabay para sa lakas at kalusugan mo? Simpleng-simple lang at madaling tanda. Ang tawag dito'y Pinggan Pinoy. Gulay at prutas, 1/2 ng plato. Kanin o tinapay, 1/3 ng plato mo. Isda o karne, 1/6 ng plato mo. Ito na ang Pinggang Pinoy. Sa modelong pinggan, sukat na sukat, bawat pangkat ng pagkain. Pagkaing balanse sa nakatatanda, mainam din sa bata.
Bingang Pinoy.
Gulay at prutas, 1/2 ng plato.
Bingang Pinoy.
Kanin o tinapay, 1/3 ng plato mo.
Bingang Pinoy.
Isda o karne, 1/6 ng plato mo.
Bingang Pinoy.
Pinggang Pinoy.
DOST. Halina kayo, kain na tayo ng brown rice. Masarap na mas masustansya pa kesa white rice. Vitamina mineral, seksay pa rin, pampalusog ng katawan ng bata't matanda. Para sa ating lahat, ang brown rice. Sagot sa malnutrition, iwas cancer, diabetes at sakit sa puso. Konting kain lang, mabubusog ka na. Halina, tulungan ang bayan. Halina,
For a daily dose of nutrition. A balanced meal with variation. A round or two of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyles. A daily dose of nutrition. A balanced meal with variation. A round or two of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyle. Live longer, happier, better with FNR.
Ang awiting ito'y gabay sa Pilipino. Para sa gustong nutrisyon, kalusugan natin dapat number 1. 10 tips lamang ang inyong tandaan. Number 1, kumain ng iba't ibang pagkain. 2, kay baby sa unang 6 months breastfeeding at mula 6 months angkop na pagkain. 3, araw-araw maggulay at prutas. 4, isda o karne at pagkain mayaman sa protina. 5, uminom ng gatas at kumain ng calcium-rich foods. 6, tubig at pagkain tiyaking malinis at ligtas. 7, gumamit ng iodized salt. 8, hinay lang sa maalat, mamantika, matamis. 9, i-maintain ang tamang timbang. 10, maging aktibo, araw-araw ehersisyo. Huwag manigarilyo, alak iwasan mo. Ito ang bagong gabay sa wastong nutrisyon. Ito ang bagong gabay sa wastong nutrisyon. Ito ang bagong gabay sa wastong nutrisyon.
Para sa Pilipino.
Pingang Pinoy. Pingang Pinoy.
Alam mo na ba na may bagong gabay para sa lakas at kalusugan mo? Simple lang at madaling tandaan. Ang tawag dito'y Pinggang Pinoy. Gulay at prutas, 1/2 ng plato. Kanin o tinapay, 1/3 ng plato mo. Isda o karne, 1/6 ng plato mo. Ito na ang Pinggang Pinoy. Sa modelong pinggan, sukat na sukat, bawat pangkat ng pagkain. Pagkaing balanse sa nakatatanda, kainan din sa bata.
Pinggang Pinoy.
Gulay at prutas, 1/2 ng plato.
Pinggang Pinoy.
Kanin o tinapay, 1/3 ng plato mo.
Pinggang Pinoy.
Isda o karne, 1/6 ng plato mo.
Pinggang Pinoy.
Pinggang Pinoy.
DOST. Halina kayo, kain na tayo ng brown rice. Masarap na mas masustansya pa kesa white rice. Vitamin at mineral, seksik pa rin. Pampalusog ng katawan ng bata't matanda. Para sa ating lahat, ang brown rice. Sagot sa malnutrisyon, iwas cancer, diabetes at sakit sa puso. Konting kain lang, mabubusog ka na.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Department of Science and Technology, Food and Nutrition Research Institute, or DOST-FNRI's second installment of the three-part OPTIDIETS webinar series with the theme Diet Optimization Using Linear Programming with Applications in Low and Middle Income Countries, or LMICs. This webinar series aims to enhance the capacity of project staff on diet optimization through linear programming approach, as well as to increase the awareness of potential end users on the importance of this mathematical modeling technique in formulating healthy diets, planning, monitoring, and evaluating nutrition policies and programs, as well as in transforming food systems. Session 1, held last September 2, 2021, focused on linear programming for building healthy diets. Today's session is on linear programming for advocacy and decision-making, while Session 3, to be held in October, will be on linear programming for food systems transformation. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar session. And it is a pleasure for me to be back in FNRI, my first workplace. It is an honor for me to be invited as the guest moderator for today's session, and it is nice to see, though virtually, my former colleagues and friends from FNRI. Hello, everyone. I am Rhea Benavides de Leon, former Science Research Specialist 1 of FNRI, and now Research Consultant of the United Nations World Food Program, Philippines. At this point, the DOST-FNRI and the OPTIDIETS team would like to acknowledge our 154 local and international participants for today's session in the Zoom webinar room, and those watching us via the DOST-FNRI's official Facebook and YouTube accounts. Thank you for taking time to join us again for another learning session on linear programming and its application in food and nutrition, particularly in advocacy and decision-making, featuring renowned experts from the Nobel Peace Prize 2020 winner, the United Nations World Food Program, or WFP. Let us start with the invocation and the singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
Give us faith so we'll be
Thank you, Ms. Lea Landicho and Mr. Albert Malaki for leading the invocation and the Philippine National Anthem. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our former director, Dr. Corazon Barba, and also joining us today is the WFP representative and country director of the Philippine Country Office, Ms. Brenda Barton. Also, we would like to welcome Ms. Joanna America, PCHRD Program Manager of the OPTIDIETS project. Welcome, everyone. To formally open the program, I would like to call on Dr. Imelda Angeles Agdepa, Director 4 and Scientist 2 of the DOST-FNRI for her welcome remarks.
To our distinguished panel of speakers and reactors, our friends from the food and nutrition community, our virtual participants here at the Zoom webinar, and those watching via DOST-FNRI's YouTube account, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to welcome you once again to the OPTIDIETS webinar series. Fresh from the success of the first session earlier this month, the DOST-FNRI, with the support from the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, brings you the second of a three-part series of exciting and contemporary webinars on diet optimization using linear programming with applications in low and middle-income countries, or what we call the LMICs. The webinar series is designed to enhance the capacity of DOST-FNRI researchers on linear programming-based diet optimization and to foster an increased awareness among potential end users of the importance of this modeling technique in various applications in food and nutrition. Today's session focuses on the application of the LP or the linear programming in advocacy and decision-making, particularly in planning, implementing, and evaluating nutrition-related policies and programs. We are honored and proud to have here with us our colleagues and friends from the United Nations World Food Program, the winner of last year's prestigious Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to combat hunger, promote peace in conflict-affected areas, and prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war. The DOST-FNRI has had the privilege of collaborating with World Food Program on the field the nutrient gap analysis in the Philippines way back in 2018 by providing data on food prices and availability from the 2015 National Nutrition Survey. The FNG framework or the Field the Nutrient Gap framework primarily uses secondary data in combination with the results from the cost of the diet linear programming tool to better understand the barriers to adequate nutrient intake in a country's context. In addition, the LP tool is used to model the economic and nutritional impact of potential nutrition interventions identified in the secondary data analysis and by stakeholders to improve access to nutrients. These interventions include but are not limited to the introduction of fortified foods and or specialized nutritious foods through market channels or social protection programs. Number two, improve access to nutrient-dense naturally occurring foods through home gardening. Number three, price reductions of certain nutritious foods through programs such as subsidies and vouchers. And number four, cash transfers to improve household purchasing power. The FNG Philippines report has identified nutrition gaps, overlaps, and potential alignment across sectors for strengthened policy and programmatic response that would positively impact on nutrition with a focus on the most vulnerable population. I do not want to add any more to that. Lest I preempt the presentations of our esteemed panel of speakers. But I want to invite you all to listen attentively to what they are going to share with us today, as well as to the valuable perspectives of our invited stakeholders from the government sectors and academia. It is my fervent hope that the FNG findings, the discussion, and the learnings from this webinar will contribute to active engagement and alignment of stakeholders across sectors on nutrition strategies and help in the redesigning of government policies, including social protection policies, so that they are more nutrition sensitive. I would like to believe that you will agree with me that coordination across all levels of government and sectors is essential to strengthen nutrition. We are deeply grateful to our development partners, such as the World Food Program, for playing an active role in filling the gaps in programming and technical assistance. Last week, the historic first ever Food System Summit was held during the United Nations General Assembly in New York. So in here, everyone, no, farmers and fisher folks, indigenous peoples, world leaders, and citizens from across the globe gathered together virtually to carve a path to a world where good food for all is a reality. We need a world where nutritious and safe food is affordable and accessible, where governments, farmers, and businesses work together to provide it in a way that protects the planet. Following the summit, you might ask ourselves, how will we continue to act for better food systems? Well, we are at the right place. By attending this webinar, we are committing ourselves to learning, sharing, gathering, and hopefully acting for food systems transformation. Just like in the previous session and the next one after this, I am confident that you will find this webinar fresh ideas and new knowledge to sustain your efforts in realizing our shared vision for a better world. Let linear programming show you the way. So once again, thank you for your time and attention, and I wish you all a fruitful learning session. Magandang umaga po ulit.
Thank you, Dr. Agdepa, for your message. Indeed, linear programming is an important and useful tool in nutrition. And I agree with you that we are in the right place now in this webinar to put the objectives that we set in the UN Food Systems Summit into action. Again, the OST, FNRI, and the OPTIDIETS team would like to acknowledge the presence of our 176 local and international participants. We have participants from South Korea, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Thailand. Thank you for your presence and support. We would like to remind our participants to post your questions in our chat box at any point during the presentations. Please indicate your name and affiliation and the resource person to whom the question is addressed to. The questions will be collated and read during the open forum at the end of the presentations. Please don't forget to complete the evaluation form, which will serve as your attendance for today's webinar. The links will be provided to you in the chat box after the session. Thank you. Now let us meet our renowned experts from the UN World Food Program, or WFP. WFP is grateful for the opportunity to share the findings and experiences of our study to help improve the availability of and access to nutritious foods and address the barriers in consuming healthy diets. This webinar will allow WFP to fulfill its commitment to collaborate with different partners from government, private sectors, non-government organizations, and other key stakeholders to help build the capacity to identify the appropriate long-term solutions and policy guidelines towards food security and nutrition. Our first speaker is Dr. Saskia Depi. She is the Senior Technical Advisor for Nutrition at the UN World Food Program, where she leads the Analytics and Science for Food and Nutrition Unit, encompassing both systems analysis for nutrition team and the food fortification and specialized nutritious foods team. She is also adjunct associate professor at the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy at Tufts University in Boston, and at Human Nutrition in Wageningen University, the Netherlands. She also collaborates with the Center for Livable Future of Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore. She has worked in public health nutrition for more than 25 years, focusing on science as well as practical applications, policies, and strategies. Her expertise include food and nutrition security, diet and climate, micronutrients, fortification, nutrition in the context of social protection, HIV/AIDS, and tuberculosis. The practical application of nutrition science at the interface of disciplines such as food technology, anthropology, economics, and in collaboration with stakeholders from government, private sectors, donors, and academia to achieve sustainable solutions for multiple goals is her passion. Prior to joining WFP in 2007, she worked for Helen Keller International in the Asia-Pacific region for 10 years. She has co-authored several scientific publications and holds a PhD in nutrition from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. For her presentation, Dr. Saskia will introduce the application of linear programming in selected LMICs and how the linear programming technique contributed to evidence-based decision-making in these countries. Furthermore, she will discuss experiences in convening various stakeholders in translating the results into appropriate actions. Her presentation will also shed light on the synergies and trade-offs between food-based recommendation and low-cost diets. For our second presentation, we will have Mr. Janos Klem and Dr. Martin Pareño. Janos Klem is a consultant with the Systems Analysis for Nutrition team at the UN World Food Program. He joined WFP in 2016 and was part of the team that conducted the Philippines Field the Nutrient Gap, or FNG, in 2018. He is currently doing his PhD at the Center for Development Research in Bonn, Germany. Dr. Martin Pareño is a medical doctor with 14 years of experience in the area of public health, food security and nutrition, and social safety net, both in development and emergency contexts. He started off his career as a volunteer doctor to one of the most remote and impoverished island municipalities in the Philippines under the Department of Health's Doctors to the Barrios program. He also served as the Nutrition Action Officer on top of his responsibility as an island physician. Later, he moved to the Department of Health Emergency Management Bureau, and then with the Action Against Hunger International, a Spanish international NGO that works on health, food security, and nutrition. He is currently the Program Policy Officer of the United Nations World Food Program, Philippines. Mr. Janos and Dr. Martin will discuss the key findings of the Fill the Nutrient Gap or FNG study conducted in the Philippines. They will also present the country's nutrition situation and barriers faced by those most at-risk groups to accessing and consuming healthy and nutritious diets, as well as the opportunities for designing interventions to improve nutrient intakes of Filipinos. Through this, it is possible to identify which nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive interventions are most appropriate in a given context to improve availability, physical access, affordability, and choice of nutritious foods which are required to have an adequate nutrient intake. Also joining us today is a remarkable panel of reactors representing the national government and stakeholders. Our first reactor is Dr. Azucena Dayanghirang. She is an experienced public health leader. For the past 29 years, she has been a facilitator and a trainer for various health programs, particularly on maternal child health and nutrition. She has served the people of Davao as City Nutrition Action Officer from 1991 to 1995, Chief of the Technical Services Division and Medical Officer 6 of the Davao City Health Office from 1996 to 2005, as well as the Provincial Health Officer and Provincial Nutrition Action Officer of Davao del Sur from 2008 to 2016. During her stint in the local government, she led the City Nutrition Committee in planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of health and nutrition programs. She initiated fresh milk supplemental feeding program, which led to the reduction of protein energy malnutrition among 0 to 6 years old children. She also successfully lobbied for the regularization of 32 nutritionist dietitians deployed in the 16 districts of Davao City in 1996. In 2016, she was elected as the National President of the Nutrition Action Officers Association of the Philippines, or NAOPA Incorporated, and shortly after that, she was appointed as the Deputy Executive Director of the National Nutrition Council, or NNC, an attached agency of the Department of Health. In August 2019, Dr. Dayanghirang was appointed as the Executive Director of NNC. Currently, she is designated as the Scaling Up Nutrition, or SUN, Philippines Government Focal Point, and most recently appointed as a member of the Executive Committee of the Global SUN Movement, representing Asia and Papua New Guinea. Recently, she was upgraded to Executive Director 4 with the rank of Assistant Secretary. Our second reactor is Dr. Leila Africa, who is a registered nutritionist dietitian and a graduate of BS Nutrition from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Her master's degree in applied nutrition was also earned from the same university. She graduated from the University of Indonesia for her doctoral degree in nutrition with the topic Development and Validation of Instruments for Assessing Infant and Young Child Feeding, Counseling Competency of Filipino Village Nutrition Workers. She has authored and co-authored several scientific articles in national and international journals. To date, she is Professor 2 at the Institute of Human Nutrition and Food at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Her specialization includes infant and young child feeding and school and community gardening. She has attended several training sessions here and abroad, she is recognized in her field of nutrition, and she was a recipient of various academic and fellowship grants and professional awards. Our panel representing the organization involved in nutrition program implementation will share with us their insights and perspectives on the application of the tool and its findings to better understand the challenges related to the uptake of the tool, utilization of the tool, and utilization of the results generated by the tool for country-level decision-making and advocacy. Without further ado, let us now hear from our speakers. So Dr. Saskia, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good evening, maybe good morning for some. We're very pleased to share with you more about our Fill the Nutrient Gap tool. Tell me if you can see my screen. Is it coming through? Yeah. You should be able to see it now. Yeah, so we use linear programming to contribute to evidence for policy and programming for improving nutrition. The linear programming tool that we use is Cost of the Diet that has been developed by Save the Children. I'll tell you more about it. So we've by now used and are using the tool in more than 40 countries. And you can see to the right a long list for Asia, as already mentioned, including the Philippines, that we'll hear from today as well. So what is this Fill the Nutrient Gap analysis? It's basically a tool to assess different sources of information, and with that identify what are good avenues to improve nutrition. So we of course have the Lancet publications 2013 and the very recent one last year. We have nutrition specific interventions, nutrition sensitive that are mentioned there. But ultimately, we need multiple sectors to collaborate, and we need to select the interventions that make sense in the country or even the subnational context. So with the Fill the Nutrient Gap nutrition-focused situation analysis, we aim to inform the application of the evidence to the national context. And the focus really is on diets, and it's on nutrients. So it's diets as well as supplements where necessary. So for the diet, that really requires a focus on the food system, including the consumer behavior. And really what we aim to assess is what choices does the consumer actually have? So if that is constrained by not being able to afford nutritious foods, then there is things in the systems that determine the food environment, the prices on the market, the availability on the market that are needed to increase the choice options of the consumer. And then we'll look at within the choices that the consumer have, what choices are being made. So from that, we identify actions across the food system, whether that's retail, whether that's production, whether it's food processing, that can make more nutritious and healthier options available to consumers. We also look at health sector interventions, including supplementation options, and also at social protection, reaching the poorest with the least access, what specific interventions can be used there to ensure that health and nutrition needs are better met. So we do this with two major analytical components. One is a review of secondary information that really serves to characterize the food system at a national level, but also very much at a subnational level. And the other component is the linear programming using the Cost of the Diet tool, with which we estimate the minimum cost of a nutrient adequate diet and the affordability of this diet. And then we also use it to look at several options to lower the cost or improve money available for food so that the affordability can improve. So with these two components, we understand, first of all, the challenges that the consumer faces to have access to an adequately nutritious and healthy diet. We can model interventions to examine the impact on access and affordability of nutritious diets. And then through that exercise, we inform a prioritization of interventions. And that last part is really what is being done by the stakeholders in country. So we support the evidence digest, and we share that so that in country decisions can be made on what the priorities are. And that evidence base that is created, that can then continue to be used, and that's also what we'll hear from Martin of the use of the FNG findings from the Philippines. So the analytical part is one with those two components, and then it is about building consensus on interventions that are prioritized to support nutritious diets. So it's also about the stakeholder engagement process. So aligning the stakeholders to see the evidence and to further that collaboration. So we engage multi-sectoral platforms, and with that then inform the country's programming, and of course also the programming from other partners, the UN and in particular WFP as well. So just what diet do we focus on? So with the cost of the diet, we analyze a nutrient adequate diet. We really like this graphic from the SOFI report from 2020, which distinguishes three kinds of modeled diets. A diet that provides sufficient energy, a diet that is nutritionally adequate, so it meets all the nutrient requirements, and then a healthy diet, which is defined as a diet that meets food-based dietary guidelines. Here you see the number of people unable to afford worldwide those three levels of diet. So 3 billion people cannot afford the lowest cost food-based dietary guideline diet, the so-called healthy diet. And then 1.5 million cannot afford the nutrient adequate diet. And I would like to add that this nutrient adequate diet, which is what we model with our cost of the diet tool, is really a diet that is mathematically optimized. The tool makes a selection of those foods that can meet all the nutrient requirements at the lowest possible cost. But that selection of foods is not necessarily a very palatable selection. They don't necessarily together make nice dishes. So this cost is a bit, the lowest cost diet is a bit artificial. So if you factor in that people will want some more variety than the 8 or 12 items that are selected, and they'll like to make those ingredients into nice dishes, you get to a somewhat higher cost, and you will get closer to that cost of a healthy diet. And that being based on food-based dietary guidelines is basically a more realistic diet. The reason why we really like to focus on the nutrient adequate diet is that with that we can also look at different target groups in the population, because the recommended intakes, they are very specific for adolescent girl, school-age children, older people, etc. Whereas the healthy diet in most countries, the food-based dietary guidelines are kind of generic. So we have less possibility to look at different target groups. And we also want to have the option of looking at fortification and looking at nutrient supplements, which we can only factor into the tool if the tool recognizes the nutrient needs, which a food-based dietary guideline diet typically does not say include X amount of fortified rice or fortified vegetable oil, or add a fortified complementary food. So interpreting the lowest cost is really the lowest cost, and in reality the cost will be higher and the non-affordability will also be higher. But to look at different intervention options, it's really a very good metric. And then looking at the second half of the graph of the slide, we can see the number of people who cannot afford the healthy diet by country income categories. And you can see that the healthy diet in low-income countries, almost nobody can afford it. And also in low middle-income countries, 60% cannot afford it, the 2 billion. That is really high. And what's interesting here, so this is the cost of these diets in those different country categories. And you can see that the healthy diet actually is cheapest in high-income countries. Now, this is international purchasing power parity, so it's all bringing it to the same kind of value level. But the fact that the cost is lowest in high-income countries basically indicates that their food system is furthest advanced to provide access to foods that together make up this healthy diet. Here we're showing from different countries across Asia the distribution of the cost within our modeled household. So we look at 5 different individuals, and you can see that the adolescent girl, the light blue on the top, and the breastfeeding woman in yellow, they have the highest cost share of this household's diet. That means that their risk of nutritional deficiencies is highest. And that allows us then also to look at different options to reduce those risks and increase their nutrient intake. Here you're looking at the non-affordability across the countries in Asia where we've conducted this analysis. And you can see that there's a wide range, both between countries as well as within countries. So this subnational look is also really important to understand what intervention makes sense. Promoting a healthier selection of foods is more doable for consumers that could in principle afford a healthy diet or a nutritious diet than consumers who can't. So that granularity is important for deciding on which strategies to use where. This non-affordability of a nutritious diet also, as nutritionists, we understand this, but this is really good to show, is that it also correlates with stunting, so with malnutrition. So that financial access to a nutritious diet, when that's constrained, then indeed we do find different forms of malnutrition. This is from the analysis with the COVID pandemic. And what we've looked at here is not only whether the COVID pandemic increased the number of people who cannot afford a healthy or a nutrient adequate diet, but we also looked at to what extent can they not afford it. So in this graph, you see that without COVID in 2020, only 30% of people in 63 low middle income countries, this is a total population of 2.5 billion, only 30% could afford a healthy diet. Now with COVID, only 26% could. But look at the proportioning of those who cannot afford below there. So at the very bottom are the people who cannot afford even a quarter of the cost of a healthy diet. So they don't have a nutrient adequate diet and maybe don't even have enough food. And that proportion increased with COVID. Then 25%, those are the people that cannot even afford 50% of the cost of a healthy diet. And 50% of the cost is kind of that lowest possible cost for a nutrient adequate diet. So this just shows further the severity of not being able to afford. So what we call the affordability gap. So how have we used the cost of the diet to model different interventions? I'm just giving you some examples. So we want to understand the reasons for poor dietary quality. So we want to know, do people have choices? And how large is their dietary gap? And who are most affected? And understanding then what causes that dietary gap. Is it low diversity of the foods that are available in the local food environment? Is it their cost? Or is it the income? Of course, affordability depends both on cost and on an income. And then we want to assess which interventions can make a difference, can make that non-affordability better, or can increase the choice of foods, and what difference does that make for whom? And then based on that, to see which interventions to prioritize. So we distinguish 4 different categories of interventions that we model using the cost of the diet tool. So one is, to the top right, is targeting vulnerable individuals with specific interventions. So realizing that interventions for the general population or for the household, that they may not be sufficient for the individuals with higher needs. So they need a bit of a top up to what reaches everyone. So this is where we look at supplementation, and why we like that nutrient adequate diet, because then we can value the effect of supplementation. This is also where we can look at school meals, whether those are including a diversity of foods, whether we're adding fortified staples. Maybe we use a specialized nutritious food for a morning porridge, for example. And we can also add supplementation, like for adolescent girls. And then to the lower right, interventions that increase the availability of nutritious foods. So here we're talking about market-based interventions, and you can also think of agricultural policy, how that affects availability and prices and diversity. We can look at crop diversification and homestead food production type interventions, reductions of post-harvest loss, so that availability is better, prices may be lower, and also different smallholder and subsisting farming interventions. Then there's interventions to increase the nutrient content of food. So one is basically preserving the content through improving transport and storage. Then, of course, there is fortification of foods, of staples, as well as of condiments and of foods for specific target groups, and also home fortification with micronutrient powder or small quantity LNS or some other types of complementary food supplements. And then another option is increasing household purchasing power. Which is where most social safety net type interventions come in, also livelihood support, agricultural practices with higher yields, giving higher incomes, and similarly also livestock related interventions. So there's many levers, and you can see that these are implemented by different sectors and different players, and often things are happening concurrently. So at a household or an individual level, they may benefit from different ones of those. So I'm going to show you a few examples. So this is Cambodia. So here we look at the cost of a nutritious diet. So this is what we got from the cost of the diet software. This is the cost of a diet for a school-age child. If that child receives a breakfast at school that is a diverse meal and it has fortified rice, this is the cost reduction to the household of feeding that child a nutritious diet. And then the next one is if the lunch was fortified rice, and you can see the decrease is bigger. It's basically because it's a larger meal that is provided. And you can see that we look at this across different areas. Here we're looking at Pakistan. And in Pakistan, this is for Punjab. You can see the food expenditure in rural and urban areas. You can see the cost of a nutritious diet, the dark blue line. And you can see that around 70% of the population in Punjab had a food expenditure that was lower than the cost of a nutrient adequate diet. So they cannot afford a nutrient adequate diet. And if you look at the lower end, the poorest 20%, the amount of money that they could afford, on the green and blue line, is less than half of the cost of a nutrient adequate diet, they receive a social protection transfer, which is shown in red. So that's the level with which their food expenditure is increasing. So you can see that there's still a huge gap remaining when they get that transfer. So because of that, it was then decided in Pakistan to add a special component to the social protection program to at least reduce the nutrient gap for those who are most vulnerable. So they weren't able to close the affordability gap for everyone in this poorest 20%. And because the consequence of that for nutrition is so severe, and because they want to improve human capital development and reduce stunting, they have a very strong focus on improving nutrition. So they are now providing to recipients of this social protection package who are in their first 1,000 days, so pregnant and lactating women and children under 2, a special nutritious food in addition to what they receive from the social safety net transfer. So to reduce that nutrient gap in that critical phase of life. And that was informed by this analysis and this visualization of the gap in the realization of the consequences. Here you see for modeling done for Myanmar, another analysis that Janos led. And you can see we have packages of interventions here. So this is a result of the modeling by target group. We put these all together and you see how package 1 reduces the cost of a nutritious diet to the household. And then we can also add the cash transfer, and that then decreases the remaining cost to the household even further. So this is how we then add up the different interventions that different household members may receive from different channels, and what that means to the household in terms of cost and hence the reduction of the cost. So these results together, they now provide evidence to support policy and programs for improving nutrition. And I'm going to show you some examples from Asia that our colleagues in the regional bureau in Asia put together. So in the health sector, we see how it makes a difference for young children and women to have specific nutrient-dense foods available for them in that phase of life. 2 examples here from Cambodia and Laos. In the education sector, that's in bold the example that I showed from Cambodia, where we found that homegrown school meals, including also fortified rice, was a very good intervention. We'll hear more on that from the Philippines findings. Social protection, how to design the most effective package that has been discussed in several countries in Asia, including Pakistan and Myanmar that I just showed you. And then for the food system, we've also really looked at different agriculture packages, where they're focusing on large scale agriculture or on homestead food production. We see the 2. So then we bring these together and we get these integrated packages of interventions. And that is basically to say that the different sectors need to collaborate to bring these together. So what has been the uptake? Also some examples for Laos. The findings were used to support the technical assistance to the government for formulating their National Nutrition Action Plan. In Sri Lanka, the findings were really used to inform food-based dietary guideline formation. And they're now forming a team to use the cost of the diet with their monitoring data. So I would say in that regard, there I could see a nice way where the Philippines and Sri Lanka can compare notes to see how they were each working with linear programming. In Myanmar, MSN-PEN, so the National Programming for Nutrition, was informed by the FNG for a prioritization of the different activities. And in Cambodia, also findings used at the national level and for specific programming applications. So we conducted an evaluation of the FNG, and we reviewed findings from 11 of those analyses, the early ones between 2015 and 2019. And we found that across the board, the findings were used for advocacy by government and WFP. And it often informed government policy development and related actions. So the strength is really in bringing that evidence to the table at the right time when nutrition is being discussed and when different sectors realize that they can also contribute. It built momentum around key issues, and that led to some new commitments from government. It strengthened relationships among the stakeholders, and of course, including WFP, because of our role in leading this process and supporting the country lead on doing that. It also was an opportunity to correct misconceptions and generate awareness about groups vulnerable to malnutrition, whether for economic reasons or because of phases in the life cycle. The findings have been reflected in WFP policy and programs, including the zero hunger reviews that are done when country strategic plans are being formulated. And it also encouraged further evidence generation because we have identified data gaps. And was also found that the application was often differed from the original objectives. So in the process, things were realized, and that led to a further tuning or an in-depth assessment of specific aspects. So just to say, we have several technical partners with whom we have developed the approach and with whom we are connecting, and as we come across certain topics, as we dive into specific questions further. We have had many donors, and apart from BMZ and USAID, these donors, they have all funded country-specific analysis. So they contribute to have an FNG conducted in a certain country. So the central funding is a small component of the total funding here. So I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you, and I look forward to now the sharing of the findings from the Philippines.
Thank you, Dr. Saskia, for the very interesting presentation showing how countries have used the linear programming or the FNG analysis. We would like to remind our participants to keep your questions coming as we continue with the presentations, and we will be reading the questions during the open forum. Please indicate your name and affiliation and the speaker to whom you would like to ask the question. Please don't forget to complete the evaluation form, and the link will be provided to you after the session. So the certificate of attendance will be given to those who submitted the evaluation form. Now we would like to call on Mr. Janosch and Dr. Martin. Welcome to the virtual floor. Thank you.
Perfect. Good afternoon, good morning. Could you confirm that you can see my screen, please?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, so like I said, good morning to everyone. In my time zone, good afternoon, and good day to everyone from Asia. Thank you very much for having me. I'm extremely pleased that we are here today and speaking about the Field Nutrient Gap analysis. I think the fact that we're still speaking about it, that we're talking about how it's being used is also great testimony to the capacity on nutrition in the country, and also just showing what a dedicated and extremely supportive champion for this analysis FNRI have been. So together with my colleague Dr. Martin Pareño, I would like to take you through the findings of the Fill the Nutrient Gap analysis, focusing particularly on the advocacy and decision-making element of the analysis. So in brief, we will go through the background, the objectives and the process in country, showing very shortly some of the key findings of the FNG in the Philippines, and then speak about how do we disseminate the findings, how do we come up with the recommendations, and what are the use cases, and how has this been really picked up of these findings and the recommendations in country. Let me start with a little bit of background, which I think really motivated the analysis in the Philippines, which is these are two different types of studies, one from the UNICEF and one from Save the Children, that undernutrition in the Philippines costs the economy annually around 1.5 to 3% of the total GDP. And we really consider this as the cost of doing nothing. So ignoring undernutrition in the Philippines annually takes a massive toll on the economy. And that in itself is a very strong argument to start thinking about, well, what can be done? So when we started setting up the objectives for the FNG in the Philippines, there were a number of different directions that our country office and the partner FNRI wanted to cover. So from the beginning, we set out to provide direction on the national guidelines for the diet supplementation of pregnant and lactating women, also taking a look at the family food bank that is distributed during the emergencies, reviewing some of the preparedness activities as part of the disaster response plan, reviewing mandatory food fortification programs in country and their take-up and usage within social protection programs, taking a close look at the dietary supplementation programs of local governments, and reviewing nutrition governance as a whole. So there was kind of both a horizontal and a vertical element where we wanted to not only understand all the different activities on nutrition that are happening in the Philippines, but also unpack, well, how are these implemented from a national to a regional to a local level? So overall, the FNG process in the Philippines lasted a good 8 to 9 months. So we started in early 2018 with defining the focus with different types of stakeholders, reviewing secondary data. Then between May and October, we really went into the, I'm going to say, like data-driven analysis and validation phase. This is really where the linear programming element of the full process comes into play, and that's the backbone of that part. And then in November 2018, we went on to the finalization. So using the findings of the linear programming, of the advocacy of the data that we generated, to then, together with a really large audience and several stakeholders, develop how these findings should be used. And that process is what we call the development of FNG recommendations. I think really essential here to highlight that the linear programming, when we speak about the advocacy and the decision-making of linear programming, it was one part of this overall process, and it's an essential part, but packing and building a full engagement around this was, I think, crucial in giving these findings and giving the tools the momentum that they ultimately achieved. I want to very briefly go through some of the results. This is a really nice overview slide where you can see our 11 key messages that we ultimately ended up with. I don't want to go read through all of them, but what you can see is that we really cover a wide range of topics. So we look at the affordability, we look at the economic access, we're looking at dietary practices and the needs of specific individuals. But then we also start unpacking what are specific entry points for different types of sectors. So trying to look at policy focuses, for example, in rice production, different types of entry pathways for emergency preparedness plans, what can school meals do, and lastly, this is number 11 here, what is the benefit and what is the leverage that multi-sectoral interventions can bring to the table. So I will now go into a little bit of more detail on some of the findings that you can already see here in the overview slide. And after that, we'll hand over to my colleague to explain how this has been used in the Philippines. An essential finding that kind of like runs through all of our FNG analysis is what we call the cost of a nutritious diet and the non-affordability. And Saskia has already shown you these numbers for the global level. For the Philippines, what we found in 2018 is that an energy-only diet would cost around 108 pesos per day, and a nutritious diet is almost double that. And we find that 1/3 of Filipino households would not be able to afford this nutritious diet, whereas with the energy-only diet, there isn't really a big non-affordability barrier. Something we did about a year ago was, with the onset of COVID-19, everyone was really interested in trying to understand, well, how do these costs change? And something that we were able to do with our linear programming estimates was to look at the changes in cost of a nutritious diet in different types of regions. So what we estimated last year was, how did these costs of a nutritious diet change, and how is this change different from what we've seen the years before? And something that we were able to highlight is that in areas like ARMM, Sogsargen, but also in Davao, the cost of a nutritious diet increased above average, so that these potentially are some hotspots that need to be reviewed. And this, I think, also highlights the use case of linear programming, that you are able to quite quickly estimate some changes and some estimates of cost to see how is the situation developing and how is it changing. Now, going back to the 2018 estimates, something that stood out to us was that areas with higher non-affordability of a nutritious diet, they also have higher stunting prevalence. So this already indicates that there's an economic barrier. So that it's not just, for example, availability, but that also just the fact of how many people are able to afford healthy, nutritious foods impacts the nutrition situation. Further looking at the economic point, we compared minimum wage levels to the cost of both the energy-only diet and the nutritious diet. And this is an example from the National Capital Region, where we found that what is considered minimum wage and what is kind of like implemented as minimum wage is largely not sufficient to buy a nutritious diet. Even if a household would spend 70% of their earnings from minimum wage on food, they're still below the minimum cost of a nutrient adequate diet. So it also shows that with some of the legislation that is in place outside of the public health focus, there's room for improvement to make sure that really a nutritious diet is economically accessible to all. When we say to all, so far I've spoken about households, but really something that's really nice about the linear programming and using the nutrient adequate or the nutritious diet as a reference point is that we're able to quantify the cost for different household members. So using the recommended nutrient intake for these different types of individuals, here we have the icons representing an adult man, a breastfeeding mother, an adolescent girl, a school-aged child, and a child under 2. We can see that the total household costs are not distributed equally across these individuals, but rather that the mother and the adolescent daughter, they make up 60% of the household food costs. So not only were we able to look at how our non-affordability and cost distributed across the country, but also how are costs distributed across individuals within a household, which then leads to the second part where we identify what can be done. And so this is the really exciting bit where we model a lot of interventions. One intervention that we are always looking at is the supplementation for women of reproductive age. And here we took a look at different types of products and supplements, ranging from some of the more global ones, so super cereal, as one of the more generic ones like super cereal, as well as some of the very target ones such as iron, folic acid. And here we can see that supplementation can decrease the minimum cost of a nutritious diet for women of reproductive age. And so depending on how these are used and what the specific target for a program is, they are a very promising intervention. We also reviewed rice fortification. We knew, of course, of the history of that there is low compliance for rice fortification historically in the Philippines, but we looked at some of the newer formulation of rice fortification and did find that using rice fortification in general food assistance has a big potential to further reduce the cost of the nutritious diet for vulnerable households. So what we've modeled here is on the very left-hand side, you see the average cost of a nutritious diet. In the middle, you see the reduction with general food assistance just by itself. And then on the right-hand side, you see general food assistance where the rice that is being given, the 50 kg per month that is given to each household is instead of normal rice is iron fortified rice. On the topic of general food assistance, we also took a look at the food packs that are being delivered. And back in 2018, what we found is that there's a slight discrepancy between the food packs as they are in the DSWD memo and as they are actually implemented. And with the linear programming tool, Cost of the Diet, we were able to identify the cost reduction that should occur with the family food pack as outlined in the policy. This is on the very right, and you see a really great reduction, so quite a good design. But then looking at the family food pack that's mostly delivered, there the reduction has the reduction is lower than the recommendation. So also something where we can very concretely analyze and advocate for policy shifts and or the implementation of policies. We've looked at kitchen gardens in the Philippines. Here we've based this on a model or programs that colleagues from Helen Keller International are implementing, a range of different vegetables in homestead gardens. And we found that if the production and the foods that are grown in the kitchen garden are diverse and they're consumed, then we do see a significant reduction in cost. And just to give you an idea, we've modeled a garden with around 9 different vegetables and fruits, ranging from squash, kangkong, tomatoes, sweet pepper, eggplant, cucumber, watermelon, string beans. So really a diverse and a very wide range of fruits and vegetables to be grown in the garden. So we see there's a reduction of cost to the household. What we also looked at is, well, what if some of the surplus is sold at the farm gate or at the household level or at market price? And so the first blue bar, this is a model that we've done for ARMM. So the first blue bar shows you the level of non-affordability in that region, and it was at around 60%. With the reduction of cost from the consumption of the household garden, you see that already decreases non-affordability to an estimated 45%. Now, if surplus of the production is being sold at what we were given the kind of like the farm gate prices or the market price, the price that households can sell these for to vendors, then the non-affordability would be down to 24%. And then the 0% is kind of a hypothetical model, but we found a big discrepancy between the market prices and the farm gate prices. And if some of that revenue was shifted to the households rather than middlemen, then there's also potential to further decrease non-affordability in the Philippines. The last intervention I want to speak about are school meals. And we've modeled school meals both for the preschool children and the school children, realizing that these are coming from slightly different agencies, but of course having a similar policy focus in mind. What we found is that the preschool and the school meals in place, they do reduce the cost of a nutritious diet. Again, in this graph, you see on the left-hand side, the baseline cost. On the right-hand side, you see the cost with the school meal in place, and there is a reduction. But taking a closer look at the school meal composition also showed us that they could be more micronutrient dense, so there could be more fresh foods, which would further reduce the cost. So I've kind of raced through a lot of different interventions, and they're very specific and they come from different sectors. And that is the type of advocacy that is usually used with government partners or specific agencies that want to understand, okay, what can we do? A big part with nutrition, given that it's multi-sectoral, is looking at the combination of different interventions. So what we also build is a package of targeted interventions. So rather than looking at each individual intervention and the impact that just one program has, we say, well, what if we combine them into different types of packages where every household member and the household as a whole is being targeted? Now, the average non-affordability that we found in the Philippines was about 35%. If we have a package in place that targets a child under 2 with Rimo blend, a school meal for the child 6 to 7 years old, and an iron folic acid for the adolescent girl and the breastfeeding woman, we find that with that intervention package in place itself, the reduction goes down to 21%. Taking a look at the 4P program, so the social protection program, just by itself, by having that cash transfer going to the households, it also reduces the non-affordability to around 22%. And now the combination of the targeted intervention package with the household social protection package could potentially, if it was widely rolled out, reduce non-affordability to 7%. So we really see that there's a substantial reduction of non-affordability when we have a package of targeted intervention. So when we have a multi-sectoral perspective, all pushing in towards the same direction, particularly when we bring in a cash transfer. So with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague from the country office, Dr. Martin Pereño, who will take us through how these findings were used in country.
Thank you so much, Janos, and good afternoon or good morning to all our listeners today. Indeed, I didn't realize it's already been 3 years since 2018, when we conducted the Field and Nutrient Gap in the Philippines. But then I think the appetite, Janos, for this tool at the same time, the advocacy is never ending. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of meetings and discussions we have had in the past few weeks, and one of which actually is the meeting with the International Labor Organization, where we want to influence them with regards to looking at the power of the minimum wage, which is one of the reasons why people cannot afford nutritious diet in the Philippines. So here, right after we've conducted the research in 2018, we had two separate discussions actually and meeting. One is with different national agencies and other stakeholders. On the upper part of the screen, you can see here the pictures, the roundtable discussion we have had with, of course, I would like to mention Saskia is here, Janos, and of course, Neil, who are also part of the FNG team. So we conducted the presentation of the result at the same time, getting all of their comments and recommendations to make the result of the study more meaningful actually. So we conducted that in 2018 in November. And then together with us were the agencies coming from the office of the vice president, the institutes, no, the team coming from the international and national non-government organizations, private sectors, very important because of the food system component, academia and the other development partners. And at the bottom part of the screen, you will see here that we also presented the findings together with the recommendations of the team 3 days after the workshop. And it was good that the cabinet secretary was present during this time. So together with him were all the ambassadors coming of the different countries as representatives in the Philippines. There was a lot of discussion actually going on towards the end, particularly on the findings on the social protection. Particularly, it's really very important and was an eye opener to all of them. In the next slide, Janos, kindly for the next slide, please. You can see here the different recommendations coming from the group. The first one is on the area of agriculture, food processing, social welfare, and education. As you can see, there was a felt need to think beyond rice. So it's not only about rice sufficiency, but making rice more nutrition sensitive. Say, for example, in the case of iron fortification, because we know very much that anemia is one of the main reasons why stunting and other forms of malnutrition is also highly prevalent in the Philippines. Second one is on the area of productivity. We need to look at the welfare of the small holder farmers because we know very well that they are very important in the food system and the sustainability of such. Another one is on the area of growing quality food, diverse food in our gardens, enough for the need of the community. And it's very relevant right now because of the COVID-19, we were even struck with the findings that 62% of the Filipino households are having food insecurity. And plus the fact that 45%, I think, of them lost their jobs. So it's actually making the situation more problematic, dire, and they need to have support on that. On the area of social welfare, we thought that it might be good to look into the inclusion of nutrition indicators in the social protection strategy. And it's good because 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting in the people pillar of the national government, no, together with the UN, to look at how do we best improve the social protection so that the most marginalized will be properly covered. And that is in the, say, for example, the area of supplementary feeding, the minimum wage, and some of these other interventions. The other one is redesigning and standardize a preschool feeding program. In 2019, when this national feeding law has come into fruition, WFP supported the national government, particularly the Department of Education and Social Welfare Development, developed the implementing rules and regulations on food, on supplementary food. And we took note that it's really important that the iron fortified rice will be there because it's already been backed up by several laws like the Food Fortification Law in 2000 and the National Feeding Program definitely in 2019. And last September 7, the Food and Drug Administration had a public consultation with regards to the amendment of the policy with regards to rice fortification. And of course, reviewing the best practices of the local procurement of, say, for example, rice and other commodities, particularly for the most marginalized. On the food processing part, we need to ensure that we unleash the potential of fortification. So it's not only about rice fortification alone, it's also on wheat, salt, what else, and other food commodities, and capitalize on the National Food Authority's unique position in scaling up with rice fortification. We know very well the internal issues and concerns with regards to the NFA's positioning right now, but it has been discussed several times as part of the UN Food Systems Summit. And there's a lot of discussions going on with the Department of Agriculture as well. And of course, support to blenders. As of now, there's only one company who has this FDA approval for the distribution and manufacturing of the fortificant, particularly for the rice fortification. And we need to support them in order to scale up the implementation at the same time, the utilization of the local people. In terms of education, we said it's really important to really look at diet diversity and accessibility and micronutrient supplementation and the prevention of overweight and obesity as well. And what is more important is to look beyond the the usual practices that we do in education by just providing them IEC materials, but really looking at the social determinants, why they behave the way they do. And that is where WFP is introducing the social and behavioral change communication. And the last one is connecting them to the small scale farmers, and especially the micronutrient supplementation for school age children, say for instance, and biofortification of other staples. And we are not only looking at rice fortification using iron, but also looking at zinc, which is very important likewise in the stunting prevention. On the next slide, you can see here that in parallel, likewise, in 2019, the government approved or developed the executive order for the creation of the Zero Hunger Task Force, which is being led right now by the Office of the Cabinet Secretary. It's really good because some of the recommendations of the Field and Nutrient Gap study were incorporated in the newly developed National Food Policy. And this National Food Policy looked at the different components of the food system. And it's very relevant right now because we are now also looking at the Nutrition for Growth Summit in December. So some of these have already been tackled in the Food System Summit last September 23 in New York, and some of this will definitely be included in the Nutrition for Growth Summit. In the last 3 slides, you can see here what we're done in terms of the utilization of the Field and Nutrient Gap study in the Philippines. So we focus on advocacy, where we had several webinars on this. Can you please click on the next few pictures, please? Thank you, Janusz. And the result was also used as a reference to other studies that was conducted by the different UN agencies. We also used the findings in the planning and policy making, particularly in the development of the National Food Policy, updating of the Philippine Plan of Action for Nutrition, which will end, by the way, next year. And we need to develop another 5 years plan for that. And of course, the social protection and capacity development. And on the next slide, you can see here the specific activities that we did in terms of advocacy. You can see here that the result was used in the research report that was developed by the FAO, UNDP, WFP, and the IFAD. No? We had this study about the assessment of the impact of the COVID-19 on food systems and what are the measures being practiced in Metro Manila. And then on several occasions, both international and national webinar, we also presented the findings. And it really gained a lot of interest, no, coming from both the national and local government, but also the international community. On the next slide, you can see here that in terms of planning, we used the findings in developing the National Food Policy, updating the Philippine Plan of Action for Nutrition, and the Social Protection Floor, where we discuss about cash assistance and how to improve the feeding program, the first 1,000 days, and particularly the minimum wage. And of course, the improvement of the family food pack, no, in terms of including the iron-fortified rice. A while ago, you saw that Janusz presented to you that one of the social protection program of the SWD is the provision of family food pack. There's a policy that requires the food pack to include iron-fortified rice, but apparently iron-fortified rice is not yet part of that. And there's a lot of move already to scale it up. Another one is, of course, the preparation for the country commitment for the recently concluded Food Systems Summit and Nutrition for Growth. On my last slide, you can see here that in terms of capacity development, one of the discussions we had with the Food and Nutrition Research Institute was to capacitate their team on the utilization of the linear programming and the cost of the diet tool, definitely. So you can see here several colleagues coming from FNRI who took part in the training, and one of which actually is this current webinar, and I'm happy that we are doing this now because it was inspired by the Field and Nutrient Gap study. And the other one is we conducted crash course virtual training for the partners who utilized the Field and Nutrient Gap for the cost of the diet tool for the study called Food Security and Nutrition in Urban Philippines and Evidence for the Remote COVID-19 Survey. So I think there's a lot of things going right now, and I'm just really glad that we are having this another platform to advocate for that and the utilization of this of the findings and of the tool itself. And my profound thanks to our colleagues from HQ, especially to Saskia and Janusz for supporting us. And of course, to our country director, Brenda Barton, and the rest of WFP Philippines and FNRI colleagues. So that's all. Thank you so much, and looking forward for the discussion later on.
Yes, thank you, Sir Janusz and Dr. Martin, for the very comprehensive presentation of the FNG study conducted in the Philippines. We have seen the usefulness of the FNG study across sectors. So before our panel discussion, let us have a group photo since some of our speakers have to leave the Zoom webinar as they have to attend to another meeting. So may I request our speakers and the FNRI officials and OPTIDIETS team to please turn on your camera. The Secretariat will assist us in taking photos. So please hold your smile for 5 seconds. Thank you.
Okay, I will take the photo po. 1, 2, 3, smile. Another one. 1, 2, 3, smile. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd like to remind our 178 local and international participants to please continue posting your questions. Please indicate your name and your affiliation and the speaker to whom you want to address the question. So please don't forget to complete the evaluation form, which will also serve as your attendance for today's session. The link will be provided to you in the chat box after the session. So let us now continue with our discussion of the perspectives from country-level decision makers and stakeholders. So let's start with Dr. Dayang Hirang. Dr. Dayang Hirang, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A pleasant afternoon to all. First of all, I would like to commend the DOST-FNRI for this another endeavor after the very successful Field and Nutrient Gap study in 2019. We find this initiative very relevant in our work in nutrition as it answers the gap between knowing the available food we have, the recommended dietary requirements, both in calories, macro and micronutrients, and the minimal amount needed by a family to meet these dietary requirements. It actually connects the previous initiatives of the Department of Agriculture on the National Food Consumption and Quantification Study, which determines the country's current production of selected commodities vis-a-vis the food consumption patterns of Filipinos, and the FNRI and the World Food Program study on the field and nutrient gap, which identifies policies and intervention packages best suited to improving access to nutrients. Well, the National Nutrition Council, as the highest policymaking and coordinating body on nutrition, relies on studies like this in helping us formulate better policies and programs on nutrition. We already know how much food is available in our country, how much of the calories, macro and micronutrients a certain individual needs, and the minimal amount needed to meet this requirement. Now with the use of linear programming approach, we can now translate this requirement into actual food with consideration on the income aspect of the population. And we can now specifically identify the amounts of locally available foods that must be consumed by an individual or a family that would meet the recommended energy and nutrient intakes at the least cost. Now, the NNC, which my agency, is very thankful for this recent development, as this would greatly help us in formulating healthy diets as well as in transforming food systems to better fit our dietary needs. The report helps us better understand the barriers to adequate nutrient intake and model potential interventions to improve access to nutritious foods and income support, which is one of the game-changing solutions from farm to table. With this, we can identify optimal strategies, policies, and programmatic interventions that will push forward our efforts in eradicating hunger and malnutrition, given the limitation of poverty. Now, this is something that we have to work on and support to gear up rapidly and effectively, despite these very challenging circumstances that we are in now. Again, I commend and congratulate DOST-FNRI, led by its director, Dr. Imelda Angeles Agrepa, and the OPTIDIETS team and all its partners. So let this innovation serve as our inspiration for our country's nutrition improvement. Expect NSC's full support in this initiative, and for other agency representatives now here present, especially Dr. Martin a while ago presented everything about the recent developments and the accomplishments and the very important laws that we have, the PPAN. Now, help join us, join the NSC in supporting this endeavor. Indeed, our solidarity will motivate the Food and Nutrition Research Institute to do its best today and beyond. Maraming salamat at mabuhay po tayong lahat. A pleasant day, everyone. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dayang Hirang, for that very challenging call for everyone to do their part in addressing the malnutrition problem in the Philippines. Now, let's proceed to our last but not the least panel reactor, Dr. Leila Africa. Thank you.
Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Good morning, good evening, good day to all of you, particularly our guests, our panelists, at the same time, our participants in this webinar. I would like to thank the Food and Nutrition Research Institute for your invitation, and I would like to categorically say that I'm still a student in this use of linear programming, although I have several studies which were conducted using this linear programming. So I will present the perspective from a user or a student in linear programming. And my objective for this presentation is to share insights and feedback on the application of linear programming tool and its findings to better understand the challenges, okay, related to uptake of the tool, utilization of the tool, and utilization of the results generated by the tool, particularly on nutrition policy and programming. So I first met linear programming through the OPTIFood, particularly through Universitas Indonesia and Simeo Recfon. And we conducted a study using OPTIFood in one of the schools in Laguna, particularly for primary school children 6 to 9 year old. From this linear programming study, we identified or we developed the optimized food-based recommendation to improve the school plus home garden program crops, particularly the identification of what crop to plant based on the food-based recommendation, and at the same time to improve the school-based feeding program based on the problem nutrients. Through this study, we found out that the absolute problem nutrient in that population is calcium, and there are also inadequacies in terms of vitamin C, vitamin A, riboflavin, folate, and vitamin 12. Through this linear programming, okay, we were able to develop the food-based recommendation, and we work together with the different stakeholders, first through the teachers, to improve the school plus home garden project by identification or by identifying what are the food commodities which are which has higher nutrients in terms of the problem nutrients. And these food items are also used in the supplementary feeding program in the school. At the same time, this food-based recommendation is also used through the improvement of the weekly menu for the school children. At the same time, the food-based recommendation is also was also communicated, okay, among mothers and students. It was also advocated to the PILA local government units so that they could provide resources for this food-based recommendation, and at the same time to help teachers in implementing the different projects as an output of the identification of the food-based recommendation. So at present, we are planning an evaluation of this project, because even if there's a COVID-19, there are also some activities even if there were all the students are in their homes. So that's for the OptiFood. My next experience in linear programming is the cost of diet. This was mentioned by Dr. Martin. So we are really grateful with the World Food Program and also the FNRI for helping us in our analysis of the cost of diet in poor communities in Quezon City. So we conducted this study in poor communities, and we computed the cost of diet, particularly to six groups under 5, 6 to 9, 6 to 8, 9 to 11, 12 to 23, 2 to 3 years old, and then 3 to 4 years old, and 4 to 5 years old. So those we use the individual groups in the calculation of the cost of diet. And I'm going to share this information. So as you can see this is the first, this is the preliminary result of the cost of diet. And I compare the cost of diet for a particular group with the minimum wage in Metro Manila. So this is based on 2021 prices. And as you can see here, the younger the age group, the higher the cost. Maybe because this is based on milk and also other beverages, because some of the although breastfeeding is included in the model, the model keeps on selecting the food item, particularly the milk and dairy products. But as Saskia mentioned, this is an opportunity on how we are going to select, if we're going to do another run of analysis, if we're going to select a cheaper or an affordable substitute for that particular food item. Maybe it will be the next in line in terms of our analysis. As I've mentioned, it's quite expensive, particularly in the first 2 years of life. And then we also identify the limiting nutrient, because we identify the component of the nutritious diet, but there are also limiting nutrients according to the different age group, particularly for 6 to 8 months. I think vitamin A is a limiting nutrient among 6 to 8 months, 9 to 11 months, 12 to 23 months. And vitamin C is also limiting nutrients in this age group. And in terms of iron, it is a limiting nutrient among 2 to 3 year old children and to 4 to 5 year old children. But let me highlight the nutrients in yellow. This means that the typical dietary habits are restricting the amount of foods that contain this nutrient that the software can include. So that's the reason why that means there's a need to improve their dietary habits so that these nutrients will no longer be the limiting nutrients. Okay, and let me share my insights. Okay, as I've mentioned, maybe I have a different point of view because I'm a user of the linear programming. So maybe I have a different insights because I think the World Food Program and Dr. Dayang Hirang provided all the usefulness of the linear programming in advocacy and program planning and management. But for me, the cost of diet assessment is really most useful when chronic malnutrition and macronutrient deficiencies have been identified as nutritional problems, and when the availability of or affordability of nutritious food are likely to be among the underlying causes of malnutrition. This is the reason why we are using this cost of diet tool, and we really want to identify identify the intervention to fill the nutrient gap. So that's really our goal in using this. However, I have the following uptake and utilization of the COD tool. Since I've mentioned I'm one of the users of this tool. Unfortunately, this is not running in Mac. I don't know if there's a new version already which can run in Mac. So for me, I have to buy another computer so that I could run the cost of diet software. And at first, at a glance, it's really quite difficult to navigate and use it. But then after quite some time, I think you really need to read the cost of diet practitioner guide. The practitioner guide is a friend, but the training is really a best friend. Why? Because you really learn how you will navigate, how you will use the software. And mentor is a plus. So I'm really grateful that the World Food Program is continuously guiding me in in analyzing the our data for this for our project. And again, practice makes perfect. If you are not using the if you are not using it, definitely you will forget it, and somehow you need to really read and reread the practitioner's guide for you to be able to master it. Now, in terms of the utilization of the COD tool, what are the challenges? First is this is a dream that the database of the COD tool will have the Philippine FCT, because most of in the database you have the Bangladesh, the Indonesia, some African countries, and of course the USDA. So it's one of my dreams that hopefully in the future software, the Philippine FCT will be included. There's also a dilemma. So if the food item is not in the list, which and how will you choose the substitute? This is very difficult for me, particularly when I was still very early in using the cost of diet tool. And at the same time, I'm also having this dilemma if we're going to include the processed food. In our research, we collect our data based on the 24-hour food recall to check what are the food items eaten by the under 5 children, and most of these have processed food. Are we going to include that? I always have the dilemma. Okay, so I just put these food items, but at the end of the day, when the model came and you have the processed food there, and you have to and if you're going to recommend it, what will I do? But again, as Saskia mentioned, we can since I'm still in the preliminary study, we can check what are the possible substitutes to make it healthier, or to make it more nutritious, particularly for our target groups. And I have this desire that more users more people would use it, particularly in the Philippines, particularly in research and development. And at the same time, this is also my desire for myself and how to use it in the particularly on modeling. And our drive is really to because it's very relevant, particularly in identifying the selection of food items which could really provide the nutritious diet for a particular group or for the household. It's really very useful for us to improve our nutrition situation. That's my point of view. But at the end of the day, we should also emphasize, I think this was also presented by Saskia and all the other speakers, that the cost of diet should also be involve different stakeholders. I think this was really emphasized. There are different policies and programs were developed because of the linear programming initiatives. And at the same time, the food system transformation is now being included in all the action points, because at the end of the day, even if we have the recommendations, but if the food system do not have the food to provide the recommendations, so how will we do it? Okay, so the food system analysis in incorporating in the linear programming initiative is really very good, because we will be able to not only identify the external domain, but also the personal domain, particularly at the household and individual level. We are talking about policy, we're talking about advocacy, but at the end of the day, who will choose the food that they're going to eat? It is really at the household level. It is really at the individual level. So that's the reason why the food system and the food environment approach in terms of analyzing what should be the different drivers for a particular household to choose a particular food for their family. Then again, I'm glad that different stakeholders are being gathered so that this linear programming approach or the cost of diet or the filling the nutrient gaps are so that many people will be able to know this the output at the same time, its relevance and its usefulness. I think we need to advocate more to our politicians and at the same time to those who are to those who are in terms of social, they are more influential in terms of how the consumers and how the consumers behave or eat a particular nutritious food. And I think this is also presented in terms of the utilization of results. There are different interventions already identified, but at the end of the day, we should also mention that how do we know that this works? Which one of the intervention? Of course, there's prioritization, but at the end of the day, we also have to measure which one works and which one needs more improvement in terms of program planning and management. And we have this goal right now, achieving sustainable healthy diets. Maybe it should also be coupled with the linear programming initiative or approach. And as I've mentioned, I think this one is from the Global Panel of Agriculture and Food System and Nutrition. So this is the how should we be eating, and this is what are actually producing. So this is how do we transform our food system. We have now the data in terms of the linear programming results. So our next challenge is how do we engage the agriculture sector? Although there are initiatives right now, I think there should be more initiatives such that our farmers will be able to produce what we should be eating. So at the end of the day, let me have this conclusion. So linear programming is necessary, is needed, it's relevant to improve the availability, accessibility of culturally acceptable and safe food. But at the end of the day, we must mention that linear programming should be used to improve the nutritional situation of our household and our vulnerable groups. Maraming salamat po sa FNRI, sa pamumuno po ni Dr. Agdepa, sa lahat sa World Food Program. Maraming salamat po sa inyong tulong. And thank you very much thank you very much po. Magandang hapon.
Thank you, Dr. Africa, for sharing your experiences, most importantly, your learnings in the use of the linear programming. Okay, before we proceed to the open forum, may we hear the reaction from our speakers from the sharing of perspectives from our panel reactors. Thank you. Doc Martin, Janos, and Dr. Saskia. Response to what we have heard from our panel reactors. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really liked the responses, and I could also see from Dr. Laila the intricacies of the use of the cost of the diet tool, and I must say we sympathize with that. The tool has been developed quite a while ago by Save the Children, and we've also liaised with them on several adaptations that would be very helpful. Originally, the tool was developed for managing a project. You're in the field somewhere, you have some food price data, you want to process that. Importing full national food price data sets, holding it against food expenditure data is sort of a next level of the use of that tool. So we are working on a next version that is a bit more user-friendly, where you can import your own food composition data, etc. So hold on for that. And meanwhile, we're happy to support the use of the current version. Yeah. And we know that Save the Children is at the stage of sharing a more user-friendly one. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Saskia. Janos or Dr. Martin?
Maybe Janos first?
No, you go, Martin. You go first.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. So I think the realization is data remains a data when it's not used and just archived. And it's very important to make the result of the presentation more meaningful and at the same time easily adaptable and understood by the local government unit. Because definitely the action really is at the local government unit. Philippines is one of the countries where the governance is really devolutionized, and local mayors are on top of all of these things. By next year is another election year, and we need to ensure that whatever we've invested since we've conducted the field nutrient gap will be included in their platform of government by next year. Aside from the fact that by next year, the Mandanas Garcia ruling, which allows local government unit to have more resources aside from their internal revenue allotment, will be dedicated to some of these social cultural issues and administrative issues to support the actions that we do in order to achieve food security and nutrition in the Philippines. And definitely NNC, through the leadership of Dr. Liang Hirang, is really on top of that. FNRI is the one building the evidences, and WFP is always here to support you along the way. Thank you so much.
Maybe I will just add, I completely agree, and thank you for those reactions. I think it's a very fine balance between creating robust evidence and having something that's usable on the ground level. And I think that striking that balance is never easy. It's always a challenge. But I think this webinar and this seminar is a really great testimony of the great work that after we've generated all the evidence, and now it's time to build advocacy and recommendations on it.
Okay, so thank you again to our esteemed speakers for sharing the expertise and insights in using linear programming in planning, monitoring, and evaluating nutrition policies and programs, as well as in advocacy. This only showed that the use of linear programming is not only useful to researchers who are the potential end users of the tool, but also to country-level decision makers and stakeholders. With that, now let's move on to the open forum. So to get the ball rolling, let's have our first question. So the first question is addressed to Dr. Saskia. So the question is from an anonymous attendee. Did you localize the Fill the Nutrient Gap tool for each country? Can it be used by region or province? What is the smallest sampling unit? Can it be used or make inferences? Over to you, Dr. Saskia.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Well, as you've seen from the slide that I showed with the range of non-affordability within the country, for each country, we do a subnational level analysis that will be at sort of admin level 1 or lower if the food price and food expenditure data allow for that. So it's really about those two data sources, or types of data that we need to be adequate for that lower level analysis. And then we also can do a localized analysis. So we have some topic specific FNGs, like for the Cox's Bazar area in Bangladesh, where the Rohingya refugees have come. So we did an analysis just for that area. And we've done that in other countries as well. In Uganda for the Karamoja area, we did a specific focus analysis for in Ethiopia on fresh food vouchers. So yeah, we can tailor the analysis to the question. And yeah, ideally for a country, we like to have that subnational and then compile it into a national metric as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saskia. Now the next question is for Janos. So would you recommend increasing the minimum wage in the country? what should we consider aside from your data in computing minimum wage in each province? Thank you.
Yes, that's a tough question. And I think it's too easy to say, oh, minimum wage should just be increased because, of course, there are always like economic barriers. What we've shown in the analysis is that in many places, people on minimum wage are not able to afford a nutritious diet. So that means these are people who go, they're into labor, but their economic power isn't large enough to access and afford a healthy, nutritious diet. And there are different ways of embracing that challenge. One could be to indeed look at the wage levels, and maybe there is a policy element there so that they could indeed be heightened. Another thing is, of course, to increase and review what is the availability and the access to nutritious foods. And potentially there is an opportunity to include a targeted intervention, to improve supplementation, or to just generally review availability of nutritious foods for the most vulnerable. But I think actually that potentially, Saskia could also add quite nicely to this, as she has recently been very, very active in the social protection discussion. So I'd like to hand over to Saskia.
Thank you, Janos. For the Food System Summit, we've built up a consortium on the role of social protection for food system transformation. And social protection, we recognize, contains social assistance packages. It has the contributory schemes for insuring yourself against a loss of income, basically, and labor market interventions. And those together fall under universal social protection, which has several components of coverage, adequacy, comprehensiveness, quality, and responsiveness. And each of those can be linked to the food system. So the example that I showed from Pakistan is really about adequacy. So realizing what the gap is that people face in access to a nutritious or a healthy diet, but also in meeting other essential needs. What amount of money should people have to meet their needs? That is a big domain, and it's very good for the nutrition community to be aware of what that contains and how to integrate the work on nutrition and towards healthier diets. And analyzing the cost structure of food in a country and comparing that to minimum wage as well as to social protection work is very good.
Thank you, Janos and Dr. Saskia. Maybe we can hear also from Dr. Martin to put it in the Philippine context regarding the minimum wage. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhea. That's true, no? The minimum wage really has to look at, because for one, the food prices are increasing. And at the same time, because of the effect of the pandemic, it has even increased significantly. But there's nothing that's currently being done with regards to the minimum wage. As you can see, the minimum wage is differ from the different regions in the country, ranging from 350 pesos to 500 pesos in Metro Manila. And there's a current discussion with regards to improving it or increasing its power, for its purchasing power. But definitely this is a huge discussion to be looked at, particularly among the policymakers. And one of which actually is the presentation of the result of the FNG just 3 weeks ago with the International Labor Organization. And we also presented the result to the Department of Labor and Employment. And we're going to follow that up in the next few weeks, perhaps, to discuss about it and to start out the discussion with the policymakers towards the end. Because there's different ways to address the nutrient gap. One is only improving the minimum wage, but the other one is through social protection. So what's going to be the long-term and short-term solution? So if I may, the discussion on improving the purchasing power of the minimum wage could be a long-term goal, but maybe at this moment, what can we look at is how to improve the delivery of the social safety net program to address those needs. Meaning to say, we need to ensure that the coverage is high enough to cover the most marginalized. We need to ensure that the energy and nutrient content of the food pack that we are providing them is sufficient enough to provide the need of the family who are displaced because of the different type of emergencies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. From our panel reactors, would you like to add or share your insights? Yes, Dr. Leila.
Hi, Rhea. Somehow this I think there's a need for dialogues, you know. Somehow I think if we really need to improve this the minimum wage, definitely what should be we have the side of the employer, we also have the side of the employee, and of course we have the side of the nutrition, okay, the nutrition community, or the need of our population. But again, if there's a need for a just wage, maybe it will be based on what is needed by the household, what is needed by our people, but what is needed by our vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leila. So we have other questions, but some of them are answered already in the Q&A box. So in the interest of time, I would like to thank again our speakers and our panel reactors for sharing their expertise and for sharing their experiences in the use of linear programming. Now let's give the certificate or award the certificate of appreciation to our speakers. So let me read the citation. Republic of the Philippines, Department of Science and Technology, Food and Nutrition Research Institute presents this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Saskia Depi for sharing her valuable knowledge on the topic. Sorry, I can't read it clearly. During the webinar series on diet optimization using linear programming with applications in low and middle income countries, Session 2, Linear Programming for Advocacy and Decision Making. Held virtually via Zoom, given this 28th day of September 2021, signed by Dr. Imelda Angeles Agdepa, Director 4 and Scientist 2. So this certificate of appreciation is also given to Janos Clem for sharing his valuable knowledge and expertise as resource person on the topic Fill the Nutrient Gap in the Philippines, Findings and Opportunities for Nutrition Policy and Programming. And same study presented by Dr. Martin Pareño. This certificate of appreciation is given to Dr. Azucena M. Dayanghirang for sharing her valuable insights and expertise as reactor during the webinar series on diet optimization. And last but not the least, this certificate of appreciation is given to Dr. Leila S. Africa. Thank you. So now we move to the last but not the least part of the program. Let us all welcome Dr. Anthony Calibo, Director 3, Deputy Director of the DOST-FNRI, to give his closing remarks.
Yes, good afternoon to all our participants in this OPTIDIETS webinar, Linear Programming Webinar Session 2. For expert speakers, Dr. Saskia Depi, Dr. Martin Pareño, and Mr. Janos Clem from the World Food Program. To our insightful reactors from the National Nutrition Council, Department of Health, Assistant Secretary Dayanghirang, and of course, Executive Director. From the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, Professor Leila Africa. to our engaging moderator, Ms. Rhea Benavides de Leon of World Food Program Philippines, to all our country stakeholders from the national government, academe, private organizations, and NGO, our FNRI community, Dr. Agdepa, Engineer Rosemary Garcia, the Chief SRS and Division Chief of NFRDD, colleagues from the DOST FNRI, to all our audience from different fields and sectors, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good afternoon to everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincerest gratitude to our expert speakers from the World Food Program Philippines, also World Food Program headquarters, and country stakeholders for imparting their valuable knowledge, insights, and experiences in the application of linear programming in public health settings. It is truly an honor for the Department of Science and Technology Food and Nutrition Research Institute. My deepest gratitude also goes to all who are present in this webinar for making it a successful event. We are truly humbled by your presence. The sharing of the speakers' expertise and experiences on linear programming for advocacy and decision-making has indeed deepened our understanding on its application for low and middle-income countries or LMICs, especially on its role in developing appropriate nutrition policies and programs. I am certain that the learnings from this session will deepen our views and our understanding to elevate ourselves in developing local, nutrition-specific, and nutrition-sensitive policies and programs, and to open possible works and collaboration in line with this topic. Before we formally close this session, please do allow me to sum up the topics and ideas that were presented in this session. The second session has been very effective in meeting its purpose. Number one, to introduce the application and experiences with linear programming in evidence-based decision-making for food-based recommendations and low-cost diets in low and middle-income countries. Number two, to discuss the key findings in fill the nutrient gap analysis by the World Food Program, which presents opportunities for identification of the most appropriate nutrition intervention to improve the nutrient intake of Filipinos. And lastly, to assess the challenges related to the uptake, utilization, and results generated by the various modeling tools through the different perspectives and experiences of nutrition program implementers. In such a short time span, our effective speakers were able to discuss the applications and impacts of linear programming in key decision-making processes and development of nutrition policies and programs to low-middle-income countries. Lastly, a big congratulations to the OPTIDIETS team led by Mr. Carl Cabanilla for their countless efforts in making such an event possible. We look forward to seeing everyone again for the last session of the linear programming webinar sometime in late October. Please follow and check the Department of Science and Technology Food and Nutrition Research Institute Facebook page for details and updates on the last session. From the DOST FNRI, again, we'd like to thank everyone. I hope we all have a productive and safe day ahead. Please continue to follow us in all our social media accounts. Congratulations and thank you for joining us for this OPTIDIET webinar series, session 2. Maraming salamat, mabuhay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Calibo. Indeed, this session 2 of the OPTIDIETS webinar series is very enriching and helpful for nutrition program planners, implementers, and evaluators, as well as nutrition advocates. To our participants, please don't forget to complete the evaluation form. The link will be provided to you in the chat box. The evaluation form will serve as your attendance for today's webinar session and basis for giving you a certificate of attendance, as well as for providing you a copy of the presentations for today's webinar. Join the DOST-FNRI and the OPTIDIETS team in their third and last session of the OPTIDIETS webinar series in October, which will focus on linear programming for food systems transformation. Thank you for learning with us. This is your guest moderator, Rhea Benavides de Leon, now giving the virtual floor over to the DOST-FNRI OPTIDIETS team. Have a great day, everyone. Always stay safe. Thank you.
Mag-brown rice Mag-brown rice na. Everything today is faster. Everything today is easier. With technology getting better, it doesn't mean we're getting healthier. While the kids are young, while the parents are working, while the stress is tough, just remember the following. Go for a daily dose of nutrition. Go for a balanced meal with variation. Go for a round or two of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyles. Inspire others to do the same. Story of life is no game. Life doesn't need to end that fast. If you choose health, the longer you last. Go for a daily dose of nutrition. Go for a balanced meal with variation. Go for a round or two of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyles. Go for a daily dose of nutrition. Go for a balanced meal with variation. Go for a round or two of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyle. Live longer, happier, better with FNR.
Ang awiting ito'y gabay sa Pilipino. Para sa gustong nutrisyon, kalusugan natin dapat number 1. 10 tips lamang ang inyong tandaan. Number 1, kumain ng iba't ibang pagkain. 2, kay baby sa unang 6 months breastfeeding at mula 6 months angkop na pagkain. 3, araw-araw maggulay at prutas. 4, isda o karne at pagkain mayaman sa protina. 5, uminom ng gatas at kumain ng calcium-rich foods. 6, tubig at pagkain tiyaking malinis at ligtas. 7, gumamit ng iodized salt. 8, hinay lang sa maalat, mamantika, matamis. 9, i-maintain ang tamang timbang. 10, maging aktibo, araw-araw ehersisyo. Huwag manigarilyo, alak iwasan mo.